watching KMCV7, Saipan's only local channel, only on Marianas Cablevision. MCV Unbeatable.
You're just in time for KMCV News.
It's coming your way in just a few minutes, and here's a quick look at what's ahead. Washington Rep. Juan Babauta says we should fight for our federal appropriation until the fiscal year ends.
And Speaker Tomas Villagomez says the Alien Labor Bill needs to be reworked to include capping and moratorium concerns.
And the $10,000 proceeds from a recent Jimmy Cliff concert are donated to the Red Cross.
It should be music to your ears that KMCV News is on its way.
Buenas noches para todos. Hamzu Tato Saipan Luta Zentinian Guahu Sikorlada Delia Guerrero.
Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday cast of KMCV News. I'm Glenn Wakai. We'll have weather and sports in just a few minutes, but we revisit the tax issue. After being stuck between a rock and a hard place, Governor Guerrero has made a hard decision. He will support last week's Ninth Circuit Court ruling allowing the Inspector General to look at your tax records. That federal court decision is in conflict with the NMI Supreme Court opinion banning the Inspector General to audit local taxes. The governor was a spectator to the oral arguments presented in San Francisco. He can no longer stand and watch. Now he's being thrown into the game because of conflicting rulings. Guerrero has to make a decision on which verdict he'd like to support. The governor hopes CNMI justices will rethink their decision and concur with the Ninth Circuit ruling.
There's no question that we want to comply with the Ninth Circuit Court because there's several merits to that decision as well in favor of other provisions in the self-government issue. And that is very important for us.
An important aspect to the Ninth Circuit opinion recognizes the CNMI's right to self-government. The three federal judges rejected the notion of the United States having plenary authority over the Commonwealth based on the Territory Clause.
They have a contrary, decisions, and we like to seek some procedures in how we can have the two courts agreed. We may have to prepare some sort of a petitioning the courts, the Supreme Court here to communicate with the Ninth Circuit courts on their ruling. And from there on, hopefully we can amicably work out the solution.
Guerrero is hopeful that the CNMI justices will see that taxpayers' rights will not be violated by the Ninth Circuit decision.
I think the important part of it is the confidentiality as what, and if they could establish and they could agree, both courts would come up with some sort of an understanding. I think we can leave whatever the courts decided, both our Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit Court.
The Ninth Circuit decision will be one of the topics of conversation on tonight's John Anderson show. John's guests will be Howard Willens, who argued the CNMI IG case, and lawyer Deanne Seamer. Both attorneys were instrumental in the creation of the covenant.
The clock is winding down for the NMI to make a final pitch on why we should get federal dollars. Leaders will need to sell their case in Washington, D.C. within the next 22 days. That's when the fiscal year ends for the federal government. Washington Rep. Juan Babauta says if we want millions of U.S. dollars, then we need to continue the fight until the clock runs down.
And we have just basically 2 or 3 weeks before Congress acts on the budget. Which will affect our $27.7 million. And also we don't know how Congress is going to act on the 702 funding. So any sense of renewal in our working relationship, in our communication, in our working relationship with Mr. Miller especially, will help push the issue along.
Babalta left for Washington this afternoon to follow developments in the NMI's request for federal funding and, if necessary, to make the arrangements for a meeting between Governor Guerrero and Congressman George Miller, our most vocal congressional critic. The governor says he doesn't want to show up to that meeting empty-handed. He wants the legislature to enact a human rights commission, and he also wants them to approve an alien labor regulation bill. Babalta says even without the legislation, the meeting is important. The clock is also ticking on the fiscal year 93 budget for the CNMI government. House Acting Ways and Means Chairman Representative Pete Regis says the latest stumbling block in passage of the budget concerns a Senate amendment over reprogramming authority.
What the Senate did is include a definition that would allow the governor to reprogram funds from the office of the mayors of its respective islands and the municipal council of its respective islands. Okay. The only catch there is that the governor shall reprogram funds only with the written consent of the expenditure authority.
Regis says the Senate has used creative language and maneuvering to achieve their goal of getting as much money as possible for Rhoda and Tinian. Deciphering their amendments has done much, he says, to render a fiscal year 93 budget useless.
What is troublesome about this approach is that when they first appear on the budget requesting 20 FTE, the House of Representatives shut that down. And what happened? They immediately turn around and redefine the definition of FTE to mean the same thing. And so that was shut down again. And what happened? Now they gave the authority to the governor to reprogram and increase the FTE. And in this case, the governor holds the pen to reprogram and the mayors hold his hand, you know, so as to dictate to the governor what to do with the reprogramming authority. That's the difficulty that we have understanding the mentality, because you know, no matter how they juggle around this legal terminology, we're bound to catch up with that.
Regis says the House is not willing to deviate from a position that it took 6 months ago. At that time, lawmakers decided there would be no more FTEs, no reprogramming authority for mayors, and that lapsed funds would go directly towards retiring the government's deficit.
As we stated earlier, the governor plans to meet with Congressman George Miller later this month. One of the bills he wants passed is the Alien Labor Act. The bill already made it to his desk once, but at that time he sent it back for further revision. Today, House Speaker Tomas Villagomez told reporters that the bill will need to address lawmakers' requests for limiting the number of aliens allowed to work in the NMI. The bill is now being worked on by 2 committees. Villagomez hopes they will soon be able to deliver an entirely new alien labor bill.
Made a move. The concern on cappings or moratoriums in there have been referred to the Committee on Labor and Immigration. Now that's that conflict again in there. It's the Committee on Commerce and Labor going to be entertaining the Alien Labor Bill 8-15 on that guideline in there, and the Labor and Select Committee on Labor and Immigration is going to be working on a different one. I feel, and we are getting inputs, and I would like to see that the committees work together and come up with one clean bill in there.
Villagomez has suggested a cap on workers from China. He says it's too difficult for our governments to communicate effectively.
Coming up next, we'll tell you the areas around the island that you should avoid fishing or swimming in. It's a long list.
And Congressman Stanley Torres continues his opposition to the Saipan zoning law.
In court news, the government called its final witness today in the case against Francisco Romangmao, the man accused of killing local businessman Sidney Kwan. Romangmao allegedly ran his car into Kwan, who was biking in front of Hakubotan on Beach Road back in April. Police officer Lieutenant Nicholas Guerrero conducted the investigation of the accident scene, and based on the markings on the gravel, dirt, and pavement, Lieutenant Guerrero testified that at a minimum, Romangmao was traveling at a speed of 49 miles per hour just before his car supposedly struck Kwan. Dr. Robert Hannon, a pathologist at the Commonwealth Health Center, was brought in to tell the jury the results of Kwan's autopsy. Kwan apparently suffered from major injuries that included fractures. Hannon says Kwan ultimately died because of traumatic shock. With that final testimony, the government rested its case this afternoon. Ramang Mao's defense is expected to begin presenting its case tomorrow. And the lawyer representing the man facing various weapons, ammunition, and drug charges makes a move in Superior Court to suppress evidence. This morning, attorney Anthony Long argued that it was wrong for police to enter Henry Ilo Iguel's home. Despite having a search warrant in hand, Long felt police did not have a right to enter Iguel's house without knocking. Therefore, anything gathered in that dwelling should not be admitted into evidence. But Assistant Attorney General Russ Marsh countered that in instances where lives could be in danger, police should not have to announce their presence. Marsh says that searching a man suspected of carrying illegal weapons is one of those instances. Marsh's point, however, is considered an unwritten law. Judge Alex Castro took Iguel's motion to suppress evidence under advisement. That means Castro may write an opinion on this request because local law does not exist on this issue. The growing visitor arrival figures from Taiwan to Saipan have come to a screeching halt now that the temporary Guam visa waiver program has been implemented. A U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service ruling under the Guam visa waiver program requires citizens of Taiwan to fly directly to Guam, bypassing the NMI. The Marianas Visitors Bureau has asked Washington Rep. Juan Babauta to intercede on our behalf with Assistant Interior Secretary Leslie Turner. Babauta says the Guam program is still being evaluated.
They are looking into this matter. They are going to give the new waiver program with Guam 6 months to see how it works. And their concern is that they didn't want, the reason why they stopped the routing through Saipan is that they didn't want non-immigrant visitors coming through the U.S. And thus they put out of the NMI. But our concern is that it's going to have an adverse, in fact it already is having an adverse impact on our tourist industry.
According to MVB statistics, in the past 10 months, 10,166 visitors have already come to our sunny shores from Taiwan. That figure represents a 19% increase in Taiwan arrivals from the year before.
Something that isn't increasing is the movement to repeal Saipan's recently enacted zoning law. In order for a referendum to appear on the ballot, 20% of the registered voters on Saipan, or 2,000 people, need to sign the anti-zoning petition. However, only 500 signatures have been collected thus far, and the deadline to file them has gone by. But one of the strongest opponents to zoning, Congressman Stanley Torres, says the effort isn't dead.
I would like to continue soliciting signatures for the next election, the next 2 years. And hopefully that by that time, the people would understand the hardship of zoning.
The zoning law only applies to commercial development.
The Disaster Relief Fund at the American Red Cross got a bit of its own relief today. They received a $10,000 check from the Pacific Trading Company. The money represents proceeds from a concert performed last month by reggae artist Jimmy Cliff. 20% will go toward the flood victims of Tropical Storm Steve, while the rest will be placed in the chapter's Disaster Relief Fund. Red Cross Vice Chairwoman Florence Pocago says the donation is timely.
We really need the money for our disaster services. We have with Tropical Storm Steve and with the flooding and then fire victims just this week, we need a lot of support.
The American Red Cross has spent $30,000 in national money helping 91 families affected by the August 8th disaster. Bokako says Pacific Trading's contribution will help because anything above that amount will have to come out of local funds.
If you plan to jump in the ocean within the next few days, there are a number of places you don't want to visit. The Division of Environmental Quality did its weekly water tests, and there were a lot of failures. 14 beaches made it onto the list of areas contaminated by fecal coliform. Get your pencils ready because here they are. Number 1, the San Roque School, Hyatt Hotel Beach, and we will soon see the Daiichi Drainage Ditch, Hafa Day Beach Hotel Beach, drainage ditch south of Hafa Day, Garapan Beach Drainage, Chalin Kanoa District 2 Drainage Ditch, Smiling Cove Marina, Daiichi Hotel Beach, Number 9 is the Samoa Housing Beach. 10, Half a Day Hotel Beach. Garapan Fishing Dock. 12 is Diamond Hotel Beach. Chalankanoa District 4, Lally Beach. Hope you caught all of that. The high concentrations of fecal coliform may be the result of storm water runoff due to recent rainstorms. Everyone is advised to stay at least 300 feet from those areas for the next 2 days.
Good evening. Tonight's forecast calls for mostly cloudy skies with isolated light showers, winds light and variable, and expect a low temperature in the mid-70s. Our seas tonight will be slight to moderate 2 to 4 feet, surf conditions 3 to 5 feet on northern clockwise through southern exposures and 1 to 3 feet elsewhere. Our first sight this evening will take place up at 11:22 with a high of 2.1 feet, and the tide will drop to a low of 0.3 of a foot at 6:51 early Thursday morning. The sun will set over the horizon at 6:29 and sunrise tomorrow morning will be at 6:10. And for tomorrow's forecast, expect the same we had today under partly cloudy skies becoming mostly cloudy by late afternoon with isolated light to moderate showers. Wind southeasterly 5 to 15 miles per hour, gusting up to 25 miles per hour, and the high temperature in the upper 80s. And that's about it for our weather report.
Thank you very much, Vicki. We can't say goodbye without asking you to tune into the John Anderson Show at 7 o'clock. Tonight's guests will be lawyers Howard Willens and Deanne Seymour. Both were key players in the drafting of the covenant. They'll be discussing the CNMI's political status, past, present, and future. In fact, they're writing a book about it. Ooh. So please tune in for that show and call in, ask questions. On behalf of the entire KMCV News crew, thanks for joining us this evening. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night.
Good night.